In order to teach you a little bit about the cardiac cycle, I'm going to take you on a bit of a journey. And my journey involves this little character. He is a red blood cell. I'm going to draw him like that just now, but just so you know, he's an RBC. He's a red blood cell. I'm probably going to represent him in a minute just with a single little red dot like this, but we're going to take him on a bit of a journey, and that's going to help us to understand this cardiac cycle, and I'll draw out numerous points as we go through. Now, let's actually start this off. I want to start this journey with a little blue box. You might be thinking, what the heck is this? Now, the point I would make here is that this little blue box here, I'm trying to remember which blue I used, I think it's this one. This little blue box here, this is, good start, James. This is the right atrium of our heart, or your heart maybe, okay? So we've got our right atrium. Now, you might be looking at it and thinking, well, okay, it doesn't look on the right, but you're mirroring here, okay? So you're looking at this mirror. Now, the point I want to make is that leading into this right atrium, we have a blood vessel, specifically a vein, and actually it's trunked into different components of this vein, but I'm going to represent it as one. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to deposit our red blood cell just here. There he is, look. He's on his way back to our heart, to our right atrium. There he is. Now, before we go any further, I want to name this blood vessel. It is the Vena Cava. I never know if I say Vena Cava or Vena Cava. I'm going to go Vena Cava today. And this red blood cell is returning back up through this vein, and it is entering the right atrium. And there's a bunch of blood in here, not just one red blood cell, you understand, but that's what's just happened. Now, this right atrium has to send that blood cell somewhere, and it's going to send it downwards, okay? And it does that by contracting. And the first thing I want to introduce you to, or the next thing I suppose, is that contraction of the heart, any part of the heart, is what we refer to as systole. Okay, so what's going to happen here is that this atrium is going to systole, it's going to contract, it's going to force this blood cell and its mates into the lower chamber of the heart. So we now need that lower chamber. Here it is. There we go. We've got a lower chamber of the heart there. This, as you're probably aware, is our right ventricle. Okay, our right ventricle. Now, you might want to be considering, well, as this atrium is contracting systole down and pushing blood downwards, what must the right ventricle be doing? It must be relaxing. And if the heart is relaxing, or any part of the heart, we call that diastole. Diastole. I know the words feel a bit weird, but just go with it, okay? Diastole. Systole, diastole. So relaxing also means filling. Is diastole. So what's happening to our red blood cell? It is traveling downwards through this little gap, which I'll come back to in a second. It's traveling down into our right ventricle this way. Now, can I stress to you that that little gap there, it has a valve on it. So I'm going to kind of draw this valve. It's a one-way valve, and it's actually called the tricuspid valve if you're interested. But that valve is allowing blood flow down into the right ventricle during atrial systole, but will not allow blood to go back. So we've now got our blood, including our red blood cell, and here it is. It's down in our ventricle. Lovely. We are happy as Larry. Now, of course, what's going to happen is this right ventricle is going to eject this blood. We know that's through systole or ventricular systole. Now, a little idea for you here. The exit for this right ventricle is actually up and behind the right atrium. So we're going to get contraction, systole up, and this red blood cell is now going to travel up. It's going to pass behind the right atrium. Remember that the heart is a three-dimensional, quite large piece of meat, large piece of muscle, okay? Traveling up behind the right atrium, and it's going to exit the heart over here. Now, this exit point actually also has a valve. They're semilunar valves, but this exit point is called our pulmonary artery. Remember, arteries always lead away from the heart, okay? Pulmonary artery. And our red blood cell is traveling up and out. And where's it going to get to? It's going to get to the lungs. Now, at the lungs, it's going to become oxygenated as a red blood cell, and it's going to travel back to our heart, struggling to sketch this, and it needs to return now, okay? So here's our red blood cell. It's been to the lung, it's past the capillary bed, it's squeezed down this little guy here, that's 7 micrometers wide. It's squeezed down a capillary that's also 7 micrometers wide, and it's now returning back to the heart. Well, what do we need here? We need an opening, and that's where I've drawn this really badly. That's where, whoops, not quite at the angle I've just drawn it, almost uphill the way I've drawn it, terrible. But now we get our red blood cell returning back into, guess what, the left atrium. Okay, now this atrium needs to take our red blood cell and it needs to force it down into the ventricle during atrial systole. By the way, you might also want to think about what's the condition of the atrium, left atrium, when the blood returns. It's during diastole for that atrium, right? But we're going to force our red blood cell down through atrial systole, through a valve, and this is now going to enter into our last chamber, which is, of course, our left ventricle. And if you're looking at that and you're thinking, well, James, that line is thicker for that chamber, I'll tell you why in a second, because it should be. So we've now got our blood, which is traveling down, and we now get our blood in our left ventricle. There's our blood cell. I don't know why I've drawn it bigger, and it's now made its way down into the left ventricle. Our left ventricle is going to undergo systole, upwards and outwards, and our red blood cell is going to travel behind again the left atrium, mirroring what happened before, and it's going to exit the heart here. Okay, so it's exiting here. Again, there's a valve here called the Semilunar Valve. So it's exiting. It goes, whoa, all the way down here. All the way. Let me see if I can sketch this out not too terribly. By the way, this blood vessel here is called the aorta. It's by far the biggest blood vessel in the body, okay? So we go here, and this is going to travel round, and of course our red blood cell is now traveling down. It's going to travel round. It's branching down into smaller arteries, different parts of the body. It's going to reach what we're going to loosely describe as the body or the tissues of the body. And guess what? It's going to return through our loop to our vena cava. Sorry for the slightly dodgy drawing of this, but it returns to, it must not be a gap, of course. Return to our vena cava, and our red blood cell now completes its journey, okay, back to the heart and from where we started. So let's just quickly reflect. Here. Okay, we've got a couple of things we want to be aware of. First of all, we've got the contraction of the heart, which of course is the emptying phase of systole. We've got the relaxation as the diastole. You might have noticed that the atria undergo contraction and relaxation together, and the ventricles undergo contraction and relaxation together, but at a different time to the atria. Okay, so just be aware of that. Secondly, I'd really stress this point about the blood being forced up and out of each of the two ventricles. I've seen it taught many ways where that is not taught to people. You need to understand that. That's really important that you understand that for future study. Okay, so I really want to stress that. And again, it's almost like I'm sort of sketching it behind. I could almost like draw a little dotted line behind the left atrium here, but that's where that blood is leaving. Okay, it's where it's leaving the heart up that way. So just be aware of that. And then finally, guys, you need to know this flow. Okay, you need to know this flow. I did forget to tell you one thing. This vein here that returns blood back to the left atrium from the lungs is the pulmonary vein. I missed that out earlier, so let me mention that right now. That is our cardiac cycle. I hope that's useful. Thanks.